Today's presentation is Diagnostics and Devices, Accelerating Value Communication with Interactive Messaging. Our speakers are Cynthia Doucet and Kassatly. Cynthia is the president of OutcomeSynergy, Inc. She has over 25 years of experience working with a large healthcare manufacturing company. She has experience in a variety of therapeutic areas, including infectious disease, diabetes, cardiovascular, and oncology. She earned a master's degree in clinical investigation from the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern and is vice president of the ISPOR Midwest Regional Chapter. Joining Cynthia will be Kassatly, who's currently a vice president of consulting at Certara. She joined Certara in 2013, where she manages the BaseCase consulting department. Atlanta oversees the development of value communication tools built for clients, and she earned a master's degree in public health from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Atlanta and Cynthia, welcome to today's event. I'll now turn it over to Atlanta to begin the presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Suzanne. So today what we'd like to cover here is a brief overview of the topics. Cynthia is first going to talk us through some recent trends in value communication. She'll then go on to look at some challenges that are specific to the diagnostic and medical device industry, and also some common communication challenges that we face when trying to communicate the value of a given product. And then I'll go on to look at the BaseCase Value and Access platform. I'll show you some examples of the types of tools that we typically develop for our clients. We'll look at some case studies from Medtronic and another global medical device firm, and then we'll look at how the BaseCase platform can be used to facilitate timely updates and country adaptations. So before we get into the contents of the webinar itself, I have two questions for the audience. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we'll look first at where you guys are based and also which industry you're working in. So Suzanne, if you could pull up the poll for me now. So if you could all vote now and let us know where you're located: North America, Latin America, Europe, Asia, Middle East and Africa. Okay, are we ready to see some results now? Perfect, so it looks like the majority of the audience are joining from North America and from Europe. Anyone who's joining very early or late in your days, thank you so much. I hope we'll make it worth your while. And then if we could go on to look at where the majority of the audience are based, which industry they're working in rather, diagnostics, devices, or another medical technology. And maybe we could pull up the results now. Great, okay, yeah, a nice distribution between all three. Wonderful, well, yeah, thank you so much for voting. And with that, I will hand it over to Cynthia to begin the webinar.
Hello, thank you for the delay. I apologize for the delay. Thank you so much to Atlanta and Suzanne for inviting me to speak today. I'm really looking forward to this session. to the discussion and to hearing the audience questions. After 27 years in the industry, I've seen a lot get better for patients and public health. I'm thinking advances in, say, heart disease treatment, devices, chronic diseases like diabetes, even infectious diseases like HIV. So much has progressed, but as we make those advances, our industry does have challenges. It's a challenging environment for medical devices, diagnostics especially. Yes, I've been in this part of the industry, so I'm a little bit biased, but I've seen a lot over the years, increasing evidence hurdles as you work to get registration and market access. We used to think in health economics of the hurdles of safety and efficacy. Then you had to add the cost effectiveness. How is this worth the money for patients, for public health, in order to get market access? And nowadays, there's a lot going on even in more depth. I've put some references here that you'll have access to when you get the PDF after this presentation, if they're helpful for you on these topics. Even diagnostics now, the evidence is needed about all the way to patient outcomes. Customers and payers are trying to think through what the value is going to be all the way to patient outcomes. That presents some challenges to communities like diagnostics, where we are one step removed from the patient outcome. We may have a diagnostic test that's accurate and fast turnaround, but does the physician get that result fast enough? Is he or she able to act upon it fast enough and choose the treatment that also has to work all the way to get to the patient, the successful patient outcome? So there's a lot going on with the underlying evidence that is evolving. There are changing coverage and reimbursement policies. All of us live with that. In the United States, I'm thinking PAMA, changes in bundled payments, even the medical device tax. There's a lot just going on, and it seems to change very often. In the EU, IVD medical device regulation, and you know of these issues, but they're really just building, and it seems sometimes to be even getting more daunting year over year. We may be seen as a commodity, these kind of products. Those are challenges. Industry is consolidating. And then, of course, we get to the COVID-19 effects on market segments. Some of our products are increasing in visibility and urgency, while others that used to be seen as having consistent revenue streams now are experiencing challenges. So when I think about these, the common thread is we really need solid evidence to make our point, and a clear way to communicate that evidence to a large variety of audiences. So getting to those communication challenges, where we're moving toward more of what BaseCase and Certara can offer. There's a research organization called the Lewin Group, and they also highlight that we have these kind of challenges. And they say that it requires dedicated time and resources to solve these, and clear and open communication among health stakeholders. So thinking about the kind of evidence we have, you have published manuscripts, presentations, you have health economic models. Many times you have calculators, either built by your, in conjunction with your sales reps or your account teams, or through the R&D teams. They're trying to think of what the result might be for a certain customer or customer segment. You have HEOR analyses, budget impact, white papers. I'd like to touch a little bit on this value assessment framework idea for those of you that might not have been exposed to them. I was fortunate to work with AdvaMed a couple years ago as they built the idea of the value assessment framework. And they built frameworks for both medical devices and diagnostics. And just a quote from their background information: they're designed for use by multiple healthcare stakeholders, patients, providers, payers, industry, et cetera, AdvaMed's value framework is intended to drive the discussion of how to objectively determine the value of medical technology and what evidence is necessary to support its use. So I recommend that you take a look at these. We start by looking at who the audience, who the population for our drug device solution. Is it patients, physicians, hospitals? And then what areas of value we might want to try to quantify. The clinical impact, of course, but there's non-clinical impact, care delivery revenue and cost impact, public and population impact. So there's a framework or a table where you put this, it helps you think through the issues, highlight what evidence you do have, what evidence you might need to find, and what metrics you could use to try to measure those. So I think it's a helpful way to think about your own evidence as you do your messaging. You have that evidence, but it's static and it's sometimes challenging to understand. So you're talking to someone and give them a manuscript and it's published, it's peer reviewed, but really, how does it apply to me as the customer? I may have different prevalence. I may have different regulatory constraints. Everything needs to be put into my own scenario. So some of the pain points in those customer communications that I've seen over the years, the decision makers may say, yes, but my scenario is different. Again, I have different prevalence. That disease is not such a big focus of my practice. What if the prevalence increases? What if I can't get to those customers? There are a lot of what ifs that they have. And they may perceive a lack of transparency if we just give them, here's how it will work for you, just trust us. And then my favorite is you've got 15 minutes. And that's true. A lot of the reps I've talked to say that their customers are so rushed, especially in this time of COVID, they've got 15 minutes to make their whole presentation and to convince the audience of the value to the health system. This is also, if you get the opportunity to speak to a hospital decision-making committee, maybe antibiotic steering committee, even then, you may think you have a longer amount of time to give a targeted, a really good a long presentation. Still, you may only have 15 minutes of that time. They're very busy people, as you know. And then there are process and technical issues. There's a lack of easy-to-use tools to tell the story. Do you need developers? How do you do this? We're used to making print materials. How do you do an interactive online presentation? There are expenses right now. I've seen people use Excel spreadsheets, try to make interactive PowerPoint presentations, and those can be expensive. You hire outside, you get consultants, and then how do you update them? They might be difficult to distribute. If you have to get it to reps around the world, how do you do it in a really safe manner? I've seen people even try CDs and mailing them around, DVDs, CDs, and then when the rep leaves the company, how do you get it back? When you make an update, how do they automatically get that update? Cumbersome user training. I've seen a spreadsheet that someone was using for an interactive message. It had 27 tabs in it. It took 3 days of training for one key message. So these can get very involved if you're trying to convey a complex message. Disparate systems, and a lot of times you'll have large data models behind it. How do you deal with that so that it looks smooth and elegant to the customer? We're going to do a quick survey to see what the audience has been experiencing, if you have yet. What kind of pain points or objections have you seen? So Suzanne, can you run that survey, please? Okay, Suzanne, if you can wrap it up, we'll move on. Shortage of time, very important issue. I would say timely, but and then my scenario is different is another, and then that perceived lack of transparency also did come up. But let's go to that shortage of time. We have been able to. I've seen a lot of app. Let me go back to share. Thank you. Shortage of time, again, very important. I've seen using technology, using BaseCase, I have used it since 2011, where we could, within 10 or 15 minutes, start with the burden to the customer, what might be the burden in your situation using their data. And then we can get through these in 10 to 15 minutes in a really kind of an elegant way. So I have been fortunate to work with diversified organizations and teams over the years. We collaborated and presented these value messages at all levels of organizations and with customers. For instance, physicians, lab directors, health systems, payers, even ministers of health. And I've seen successes and found lessons learned. And looking at it overall, it can be very impactful when you can provide a targeted and interactive message. So what if you could have that relevant evidence and your knowledge of the customer's needs, and you can integrate that into an interactive discussion. So these discussions, they're data-driven. It's one-to-one or one-to-many. We've done them at conferences, used a big screen along the wall, the size of the wall, with touch screen, so you can put people's assumptions and you can see the results, and you can do it in front of even a larger audience. They're data-driven. They're live calculations based on the assumptions and the information that your customer gives you. So it really feels like throughout the course of the discussion that it's personalized. They take ownership during the course of that 10, 15-minute discussion of the results because it's transparent and they see their input incorporated and they see answers in their context. So really what we're trying to do with this interactive value messaging is to tell their story. Atlanta, I'd like to turn it back to you for some more examples and details from the BaseCase perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cynthia. Great, yeah, so I would now like to use the second half of today's webinar to talk specifically about the BaseCase Value and Access platform. We'll look at some examples of the types of tools that we typically develop for our clients. We'll go through some case studies, one from Medtronic and another from a global medical device firm, to see how they were able to use the platform. And we'll also look at using the platform for country adaptations and localizations. So yeah, the BaseCase Value and Access platform is Certara's real-world solution to create, deploy, and easily maintain data-driven value communication tools. We can perform live calculations using integrated spreadsheets and visualize large data sets. And we can use the same tool across devices, both online and offline. So a tool, an app that we develop for one of our clients, their field teams would be able to use it on their laptop, on their iPad, on a Windows tablet. And as we've seen lately with the pandemic, a lot of meetings are going to remote, and so the same tool could also be presented on a desktop over WebEx or Zoom or GoToWebinar, as we are actually doing right now. This entire presentation is a BaseCase app, and tools work both online and offline. So, for example, let's say field teams are visiting a lab administrator in a basement. They're not sure if they're going to have access to the internet. It's not a problem. They can still use one of the tools created on the platform. And the platform employs a no-code concept, which means we can create flexible, interactive content without programming using a drag-and-drop editor. So this flexibility, of course, enables cost-effective adaptations for different markets and countries. And it also means that updates can be made instantly when required, in line with changing regulations, new research, and information and content becoming available. Or if we want to, for example, update tools based on feedback coming from the field about use. So before we go any further, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself and my team. So I run one of the consulting teams within Certara, and we're specialized in the development of these value communication tools using the BaseCase platform. So we have our consultants who bring their expertise in the subject matter, their understanding of the stories that our clients are trying to tell. They have backgrounds in health economics, biology, medicine, and together they work with user interface and graphic designers who are very, very experienced, very well versed at presenting content in beautiful, impactful, engaging, and intuitive ways, and designing tools that meet the needs of our stakeholders and the needs of their audience, and match the time and the level of discussion that's going to be available. And typically we develop, for example, interactive versions of the budget impact model, cost effectiveness models, cost calculators, data-driven tools, for example, benchmarking tools that use Medicare data to benchmark a particular facility against state and national averages, and perhaps show how a new device or diagnostic could help to improve clinical outcomes at that facility or increase revenue. And also interactive versions of perhaps the global value dossier or a value story. So these typically large static volumes of content, generally on PowerPoint, can be put onto the platform and displayed in a much more interactive, engaging, and ultimately interesting way. Because we have this ability to link these data sets and Excel models in the background, we can engage decision makers with relevant and personalized content. So during a discussion with a stakeholder, field teams can automatically update the assumptions about the population, perhaps the assumptions about the cost, change any inputs about the epidemiology of the disease to be sure that the results that they're generating are specific to that particular stakeholder and relevant. The platform is also a great way to present complex concepts and data in a format that can be easily and quickly understood. So as Cynthia has alluded to, and as the audience confirmed, time is often an issue. There's limited time available for the discussion, and so we need to make sure that we can present the key value messages, the ultimate conclusion, as quickly and as concisely as possible. And perhaps also it could be that the person that we're presenting to is not an expert in the field. Maybe we're presenting to a clinician who understands the clinical aspects of the technology and how it can improve outcomes very well, but perhaps they're less familiar with the financial and economic aspects. Similarly, we could be presenting to a hospital administrator who has a lot of background and understanding of the financial aspect, but less background in the disease and the technology itself. And as a function of the platform itself and its capabilities, it's also a great way for us to present value messages, supporting data, sources, models, videos, anything that will substantiate the value story alongside each other as one cohesive and complete presentation. So with that, I'd like to go specifically into the platform itself so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. We'll look at two example tools. These are entirely fictional, but based on the types of tools that we develop for our clients. The first is a contracting tool that field teams would use with a particular account to develop a contract based on products in the portfolio. And the second is an ROI calculator that could be used to show a specific facility the potential return on investment that they could make by introducing a new stent in this instance. So we'll look first at the contracting tool. So this is for a fictional company called Fictomed. Everything is created custom, as we'll see when I show you the back end of the platform. We can fully customize all of the content that's presented, the colors, the look and feel, the branding, to be specific to the needs of our client. So we can imagine for Fictomed, it's this nice blue and green branding. And yeah, up front, we need to select where we are. Perhaps the company has different prices or different portfolios available for different states. So I'm in New York, we'll go with that and press confirm. And then we have an overview of the products available in FictoMed's portfolio. Typically, our clients include some kind of introductory background pages before getting into any kind of cost calculator. This could be background information on the disease, the performance of the device or diagnostic, and in this instance, it's just an overview of their products in the different therapeutic areas. And then we get into the contracting tool itself. So we have some contracting options up here in terms of the length, one payment, or we can have 1 year, 2 years, 4 years. So let's go with 4 years. And then in terms of the payment terms, it could either be monthly or annual. So let's go with annual. And then in terms of servicing, we can select with or without servicing, and we'll keep it with, I think. And now we can add some products to our contract. So here we have some drop downs with all of the therapeutic areas that FictoMed has products available in, specific products that we can select from, and item numbers. And this is all coming from an underlying data set. So let's stick with the neurology. We'll do this nice neurostimulator, and we'll have 2 of these. And I can then add this to the contract. And perhaps within cardiology, we'll have a pacemaker. And maybe we'll also have a cardiac trigger monitor. And you can see how all of those items are being added to the contract. And then I can also edit the discount that's going to be available. So at 4 years, let's say we want to give a discount of 3%. And then because we have an annual payment, we're only going to give a discount of 0.5%. And all of these inputs will be fed into the underlying model and the results updated in the interface. And we can see the total value of our contract here underneath. And then I have the option to export the contract. So this is going to download a PDF report of the contents of the contract. Typically, our clients include these types of downloadable or emailable reports. They could be the slides from the value story. They could be the results of the budget impact model, or in this instance, the calculator. So I'll just put my name here, sign it with my unwieldy mouse, and press confirm. And then it's going to download a copy of the contract for me as a PDF. And here we have it, very nice and simple. And the second example that I wanted to show you was for this fictional company called Plantal, who have a new stent available. So up front, we select where we are in terms of state, city, and facility, and this is going to pull in some Medicare data, which will pre-populate the tool with the default values in terms of admissions, length of stay, cost per procedure, and so on. So we will go to New York again. And let's go to Brooklyn. Great. And now we can go to view results. And we can see at a very high level the summary of the return on investment for a Brookdale Hospital Medical Center. We have a decrease in the length of stay with nanostent of 2 days. We have a decrease in the cost per procedure of $5,300, and we have an increase in net operating income as well. And then if we want to see how those results are being calculated, we can click on the pop-ups here for more information. We typically try to layer content in this way when we build tools for clients, so it's possible to show the background information and the assumptions when required, but we're not cluttering the main interface with unnecessary text. And then we have a few slides showing the cost per procedure with current and with nanostent, the net operating income, and then our business case summary at the end. Now, of course, let's say the person we're presenting to thinks that 153% return on investment is really a very optimistic return, as is the increase in net operating income. So we want to edit the assumptions and the inputs a little bit. So we can go to the investment. We have the total discharges here coming from the underlying data set. And then in terms of the costs of the current stent and a nano stent, I can edit those. So let's say they think their current cost is closer to 4,500. That will update the model and the results that are being generated. And similarly, in terms of length of stay, perhaps they think 6 days is a little bit pessimistic in terms of what they're currently achieving. We want to do 5 instead. Again, that will update all of the results. And again, we have the option to download the PDF report summary of the results that we just generated. What I'd like to do now is show you under the hood of the BaseCase platform in terms of how these tools are constructed. And I'll do this with a different app just to give you a better idea of the flexibility that we have. So this is for another hypothetical example for hip resurfacing. And instead of opening the tool as a presentation, I'm going to go to Edit App, and this will allow me to edit the contents of the tool. Now you can see that it is basically employing many of the same principles as PowerPoint. So we have our canvas here, which is the interface that we'll have in our tool. And then we have our toolbox on the right-hand side where I can select various objects, various controls to use, bar charts, buttons, labels, drop-downs, and so on. And those can all be added to the interface and styled. For example, this is a text area. This is a button. We have a nice image in the background. And then connected to this interface, we have the underlying modeling layer. And you can see we have our budget impact model here. And so any inputs that I change on the interface will be fed into the underlying model and the results calculated and fed back to the interface. So let's say for this nice tool on hip resurfacing, I just need to make a very simple change. Perhaps some regulations have changed and the tool is no longer suitable for use in the UK. So I can just add that condition to the terms and conditions that we have here. And stop. Save that, and then maybe I need to extend the text area a little bit so we can see the content. Perhaps I want to move this down a bit so that the spacing is right. And then it would simply be a case of publishing that when I wanted to push out the update. So anyone who had access to the tool would receive an updated version of it. They wouldn't need to do anything, it would be automatic. And the next time they present it, they would see the latest version. Similarly, if I wanted to make any updates to the content itself, we can see here we have some background information on epidemiology. Perhaps I need to update my chart. We're only going to 2010 here. This is an image, so I would easily be able to change that if I needed to, or to update the text or the references. Now, if we go back to the overview here, I'm going to go to the list of apps that I have access to, basically to show you how, excuse me, how BaseCase apps are shared and managed. So here we have a list of all of the tools that I, with my email address, have been granted access to. And this is how our clients share their tools also. So if, for example, a particular individual leaves the organization, you would simply remove access to that email address and they would no longer have access to the tool. So now if we go back to our main presentation, I'd like to move on to look at two case studies of tools that we built for previous clients. So the first was a glucose monitoring, a tool showcasing the value of a glucose monitor for diabetes. So our client was looking for a tool to aid in negotiations with key payers and stakeholders who were directly involved in formulary application and approval across multiple local health economies. They needed to demonstrate the clinical and economic benefits of the glucose monitoring system clearly and concisely. And of course, they also needed some dynamic elements to facilitate a personalized two-way discussion with a range of key stakeholders. Similarly, they also wanted the ability to download or email a PDF report of the budget impact results discussed that would serve as a nice summary and leave behind. Often our clients also use the PDF report function to send something as a pre-read before the meeting itself. And then if we go on to look at what we were able to achieve or what they were able to achieve with us in the BaseCase platform, they found that the downloadable PDF report was particularly useful for healthcare providers. They were able to use it directly in their formulary applications or business cases. And similarly, they found that the stakeholders were engaged by the relevant locality-specific data and also by the ability to model the predicted cost difference versus the current standard of care based on acquisition cost alone or by factoring in resource utilization. Similarly, they also found that the tool and how easy it was to use, how interactive it was, how engaging it was, created opportunities to meet with stakeholders who were previously less accessible. And this is a really great result, since being granted reimbursement, over 100 local health economies had approved access to the technology, and BaseCase and the BaseCase tool that they were able to develop with us had a large part to play in that. Now, if we go on to look at the tool that we built together with Medtronic to showcase the value of minimally invasive surgery, Medtronic were looking to present the value proposition of MIS to stakeholders in a single screen. So they wanted something very simple, very high level, very eye-catching. And they needed to translate the clinical value of MIS into the associated economic value. And of course, we only had one screen. It needed to be as simple as possible while remaining accurate and credible. And similarly, they also needed the flexibility to adapt the content and the data to multiple countries. So this is where this concept of centralized control and consistency becomes very important. And I'll show you how we can manage that with the BaseCase platform a little bit later. And in terms of the results that Medtronic were able to achieve with the platform, well, they found that the simplicity of the app made the value proposition easy to understand, encouraging active participation. So rather than their stakeholders sitting with one of their key account managers, going page by page through a lengthy value story, the one page meant that they could quickly illustrate the results and then have a really active and dynamic conversation. The data was, of course, visualized in an interactive manner, and you could instantly see how changing an input impacted the results. And we also included some background information and references that could be displayed on demand. So they weren't shown up front. We didn't want to clutter the interface or burden the user with information that they weren't interested in. But if there was an interest, it was available. And they also found that the flexible format allowed for timely local adaptations. Something else that was particularly beneficial, after we had released the tool and they started using it in the field, they found that they needed to make a quick update, a quick change, and they were actually able to turn this around in-house, so doing it themselves with the BaseCase editor in just one day. So this concept of keeping up tools up to date with the latest research is challenging. It's always going to be challenging. Cynthia alluded to it. Our clients have seen it. If we want to maintain tool use, if we want to maintain impact, if we want to stay ahead of competitors, we need a platform that enables quick, easy, and cost-effective updates when required. And the flexibility of the BaseCase platform really facilitates this. So as we saw, it's very easy to update default values and references if necessary. We can also revise the branding when required. Perhaps there's a merger or an acquisition. And content can also be added and removed as the market evolves and customer interests change. Similarly, if we look specifically at this idea of country adaptations and localizations, we can add and remove content as it fits for a particular locality, update the underlying model, the underlying references, and make everything specific to that particular country or region. Of course, a smooth country adaptation process is critical to successful launch. We need to make sure that we get the right content to the field teams on time so as not to miss a market opportunity. And so we've actually developed a native country adaptation process and translation workflow to facilitate that. And I would love to show you that now also. So I'm going to go back to our NanoStent app, but this time to a copy. So I've basically just made a copy of the core English app, and I've renamed it Spanish. And now what we're going to do is translate it into Spanish. So if I go into edit mode, and I'll go over here to more, and we can see various options are available. And I'm going to choose localization. And now we have the option to download the template, upload the template, or flip the layout. So when I click download template, it's going to download an Excel file with all of the content in the tool, all of the text, all of the labels, and so on. And this is something that either we would share with our client and they would translate in-house, or we would send to a translation agency. So we can see it here. We have the text in the app over 2 columns, just duplicated, the source and the target, and what the agency or our client would do would be put the foreign language equivalent in this column. So in the interest of time, I'm going to use one that I prepared earlier. Here we have it, and it is, yep, we have the English here and the Spanish on the right-hand side, so I'll click open. And that is then going to show me a kind of summary of the translation, the stuff that was changed, any warnings or errors that need to be available. Looks all good. And then I can just hit apply translation, and that will change all of the text to the foreign language equivalent. And then it would just be a case of manually going through and checking that nothing is truncated, that all of the content still looks the way it should. English, typically speaking, is much shorter in terms of word and sentence length than other languages, so typically we need to resize some controls a little bit in case anything is truncated. We can see here the little button is cut off, so I would want to make this a bit bigger and perhaps make this smaller. And then it would be a case of publishing this tool and then sharing it via email address with all of the users who I wanted to have access to the Spanish version. Similarly, if we think about more substantial adaptations, perhaps we also want to replace the global model with a country-specific model. Almost certainly we want to update some of the default values being used, update the references, and perhaps we also want to set a new currency. And we can do all of that with the BaseCase platform very quickly and easily. So that brings us to the end of everything that Cynthia and I wanted to present today. I hope that together we've given you a good idea of recent trends in value communication, some of the challenges in the industry and for communication in general, and also the BaseCase platform and how it can help to accelerate decision makers' understanding of the value of a given diagnostic or medical device to a stakeholder. And with that, I think we can turn it over to questions. We'd love to hear from you guys on any questions that you might have.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Atlanta and Cynthia. We've got some questions from our audience. Atlanta, somebody would like to know if BaseCase has the option to run VBA modules coming from a cost effectiveness model. I hope I got that question.
I think you did, and we don't currently have that capability, no. Currently, VBA modules are not supported on the platform. So typically the cost effectiveness kind of sensitivity analysis and so on, we would exclude. However, if we're only talking about a 15-minute conversation with a decision maker, that's generally not something that they would want to present in an interactive tool.
Great. Cynthia, someone would like to know whether the value assessment framework also fits in the new European MDR regulation.
Thank you. Great question. I focused a lot on the AdvaMed value framework because that was the one I know best. There are many other frameworks around from European medical agencies, and a lot of industry groups have worked on frameworks. So there are other frameworks that may be specific, but in general, a framework is really agnostic to what your environment is. You start by thinking of, you assess your environment, you assess the needs, and then you look at your audiences, and then you build this, you fill in the blanks to figure out what you have to meet those needs. So you, as the developer of your own framework, how do your company's products and solutions meet the needs of the customers? That's really, you put it in context of a framework kind of template. So I consider them agnostic.
Great, thank you. We got another question. We talk a lot about the word value. What does value mean to you in the customer's eye in terms of hospitals or physicians, particularly in today's environment?
Another great question. In the field of health economics, we've been thinking about this for decades, and value does mean it's definitely different for every audience. So it's a question that's right on target. So when I think about cost, certainly comes into everybody's first question in today's environment. When you look at talking to, say, lab directors, they're looking for maybe a lower cost of a test. They want accuracy, quick turnaround time. When you're looking at physicians, patient health, satisfaction, mortality, quality of life. When you get up to the ED, maybe they have capacity restrictions, especially now in time of COVID. So they need to get people in and out of there fast. Length of stay in the hospital, length of stay in the ED. Antibiotic steering committees, reducing unnecessary antibiotic use. And you also think carefully about the metrics. So whenever we start a project, we think who our audience is going to be. What are their true needs? What's affecting them? What's keeping them up at night? What are the metrics that apply to them? If they're dealing with sepsis, you want to look at the SEP1 metrics or whatever metric is in use in your country. And a lot of that data is available publicly. So you're right, it depends on who you're looking at. Cost is always a factor, and then you work directly with the customers and as part of your team as you plan this messaging. Thanks.
Thanks, Cynthia. Question for Atlanta. How long in your experience does it take to develop an app from start to finish?
Sure, yeah, great question. So typically speaking, we estimate 13 weeks from start to finish. There's a first version of the tool that's interactive and dynamic and kind of can be used internally and tested with key stakeholders before that 13-week point. But yeah, typically we would say 13 weeks. This, of course, could vary if we're talking about something very, very simple, or if there's a deadline that a client would have in mind, then the timelines can, of course, be adjusted to that. And some more complex or more voluminous projects would also potentially take more time than the 13 weeks.
Thanks, Atlanta. Wouldn't be a webinar without a question about COVID. Cynthia, well, the pandemic's on everyone's mind. In your experience, how do you think COVID-19 is going to affect people's strategies for market access and value communication?
Wow. Okay. So, thank you. We obviously won't know for some time, but I see certainly in addition to challenges, there are potentially some opportunities here. Anecdotally, if the product isn't related to COVID, reps are having troubles getting in to see doctors and hospitals and health system decision makers. So I found it actually, there's at least in the I believe it's US based, but there's a reference called Up to Date that the physicians use. Health economics used to report through medical affairs in one of the companies I worked at. And they're so focused on, it really is helpful because the bottom line clinical value of what we provide for public health and patients is the answer. So we used to watch Up to Date very carefully, read about the disease state that you are addressing, and a lot of times in that reference that the physicians are looking at as they decide on treatment and diagnosis, it does mention COVID and how it affects it. So if there is some sort of connection between COVID and yours, for instance, even it's being talked about in some circles that you need to know the troponin levels in order to be able to do prognosis. They may contribute. So I'm not a doctor, but what I'm saying is look for the angles in the medical literature about your product. Also, as hospitals, EDs, and I mentioned capacity issues. So if you know that they're dealing with turnaround time, maybe you have an angle about your messaging about timely, accurate, get people through that ED throughput could be enhanced. Maybe you have a play with hospital length of stay. So just look for all those angles and make an interactive, really timely, targeted message using this kind of tool. Elective surgeries, as you know, for those of you in orthopedic devices, elective surgeries have gone down, but maybe there's going to be a shift now that people have not been having those elective surgeries. Maybe their health is experiencing challenges, and maybe now there's going to be an uptake in, or an uptick in those. I've also read a lot about the innovation pipeline. So as your companies are looking at R&D, maybe you're going to be focusing on at-home care for people as hospitals are full and maybe people aren't comfortable going into those situations. Maybe you have a play in at-home healthcare. And finally, supply chain is big. As company, hospitals, physicians' offices, and so on have tried to consolidate over the years to have one great supplier that they love, what if they're experiencing challenges in getting those supplies or devices or tests now? Maybe they're going to be looking to, because of those inventory problems, and maybe they're going to be looking to locally source some more of their solutions. Maybe they're going to open it up to additional vendors. I just don't know, but supply chain might be another interesting issue. And of course, you finally have the sales rep. What is going to happen here when you can't go into the physician office or to the hospital as much? Can you do things online? Can you do more interactive things such as we're doing today using BaseCase? Maybe there are training opportunities or things that you can do, then move it online to make your reps and your teams have even more value in a safe way in this climate. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we have one last question for Atlanta. You mentioned contracting tools and ROI calculators. What other tools can I make using BaseCase?
Sure, great question. So many. So yeah, the typical calculator-based tools that our clients develop with us would be interactive versions of their budget impact models, their cost effectiveness models. Also, I cited this example of benchmarking tools that, for example, using Medicare data show the economic impact of a particular device or diagnostic on a facility. Also, these interactive versions of typically static content, for example, the GBT, a value story, for example. And yeah, I mean, we've also seen clients developing surveys with the tools, developing tools to archetype different payers and basically for use internally to kind of assess the market landscape before developing a strategy. Based on the flexibility of the platform and the flexibility of the content that we can put on the interface, it's really possible to develop any kind of tool. It's really, yeah, the possibilities are infinite.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cynthia and Atlanta, and thank you so much to our audience for their attention and those excellent questions. We just have a few short announcements before wrapping up the webinar. On September 10th, Dr. Yuan Chen from Genentech will present Solving a Mystery Using PBPK, How Drug Excipient Complexes Can Confound a Metabolic DDI Result. You can register for all webinars by visiting Certara.com. On behalf of Certara, I would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. This concludes the webinar. Goodbye and have a great day.